Welcome to the Ranchonomics Podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to a special edition of the Ranchonomics Podcast. We are going to do a quick hot take with one of our team members about screwworm. Travis Krause is down in South Texas, right in the epicenter of where all this is going on in the U.S., and I wanted to get a few thoughts from him on what the rest of us should be thinking about the screwworm outbreak in the southern tip of Texas. Travis, I'd like to divide this conversation into two pieces. One, let's talk about those that are directly affected, like you are, and let's talk about the rest of us who live in the rest of the country, what we think the impact is going to be. So, Travis, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here. Let's get started.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here. Let's do it.
So let's start down in the area directly affected. What does screwworm mean for cattle? Give us a little bit of a description of what the screwworm is. What does it do?
Yeah. I think it has quite an interesting history in the livestock industry in the United States, predominantly the southern United States. It's actually endemic to this part of Texas. So the endemic zone, meaning like where it's native to, spans from here in South Texas all the way down into Central and parts of South America, is where it's historically been endemic to, right? It was eradicated in the late 60s officially. You talk to some old ranchers around here that say it was still around in the early 70s. And so it was eradicated through the use of the sterile fly program. And a lot of people will tell you that it was probably one of the greatest successes really in agricultural history, especially for the southern part of the United States. So, kind of like the biological life cycle of this fly, and my understanding, and by the way, I'm not a screwworm expert, but, I think they have about a 21-day life cycle is my understanding. It's a small fly, looks similar to, your everyday house flies, same size, but it has some unique characteristics. And one of those being it does not feed on dead flesh like most flies and their maggots, right? It feeds on live flesh, hence the problem, right? So the adult female fly will lay one set of eggs. She will only breed one time, is my understanding, right? And so she can lay her fly in an open wound, also eyes, ears, and other orifices of the body can get eggs in them and end up with maggots, right? The maggots, has a life cycle. I'm not real sure how many days, but, you talk to a lot of the guys around here that lived through it in the 60s and 70s, and they'll talk about a horse walking up with his face half eaten off, still alive, or cows with big, giant open wounds that, smell real bad. Everybody you talk to remembers the smell, how bad it was of the open wound. So there was some treatment options back then where they would use these salves or, and dipping vats was a common thing in this part of the world. And so this sterile fly program, they irradiate males in these facilities and release the males, which breed the females, and then it's a sterile eggs, basically, right? So the female mates once. So she mates with a sterile fly, kaput, the problem solved, right? So fascinating biological history, a real serious threat to the cattle and wildlife industry. My understanding is seasonally, the screwworm moved all the way north as far as like Nebraska, seasonally, right?
Yeah,
so
the old map shows eastern Kansas, pretty much all the way up to the Nebraska border.
Yeah. Right, up to the Nebraska border. So,
and then, of course, across to Southern California, across the Bill.
Yep. It was seasonal, though, up in those areas because it gets cold and it kills them out, right? So, but down here, it can live year-round. So the issue is a lot of the sterile fly facilities are no longer operational for a long time now. And so in 2023, kind of beginning around that time frame, it surged north out of Panama, where it had been held in check, so to speak, for like 60 years in the Darien Gap, right? And surged north out of there into Central America and then into Mexico. And here we are in, spring of 2026. And I believe there's over 20 cases confirmed now in Texas. Most models say there's probably 10 to 20 times that many animals infected.
Yeah, Very good.
So that's kind of the brief history of it.
A quick bit of research here shows that we're about 7 days of maggots feeding in the wound, and then they get off, burrow
They
into the
drop out.
ground.
That's right. And that's why it's called the screwworm, by the way, is because it screws into the soil.
Interesting. Okay, then they're about 7 days there before an adult fly emerges. And for all of us who forget our basic biology from elementary and junior high, the reproductive phase is the fly. That's where the adults mate and then lay eggs. And then I can't remember what you call the other
then
phase.
larvae.
The larvae,
then pupae. Right. Then pupae is when it actually begins to turn back into goes in the ground, turns back into an adult fly, as it reemerges.
All right, awesome. So let's talk about impacts. Impacts down around your area, obviously. Oh, one other thing that's interesting to me, this is included in impacts. You guys live where there are a lot of thorns. And the interesting thing to me is
a lot of brush.
Yeah, that's right. That's where it is amazing to me when you started talking about the number of animals you have walking around with open wounds. I tend to think about a newborn calf or something that had a particular, has had an accident. But for your case, most cattle walking around down in that scrub brush country, thorn brush country, have open wounds. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, and look, I think it's actually worth acknowledging, or at least having a simple understanding of the ranching industry in the 60s in Texas is very different than what it is today, right? So we have, much stronger, sort of weekend warrior hobby ranchers around, Texas now compared to that time period. And every person has 5 to 10 cows in their little cow herd getting their ag exemption, right? And so, these are people that aren't on site daily with their animals like a person like myself would be. I'm not even, putting eyes on all of my animals. It's virtually impossible to do that on a daily basis, as spread out as they are. But, the industry is a very different looking thing now than it was in the 1960s. And when we talk about the idea of, okay, well, we can treat them with, Duramectin, or which is like the Dectomax, type drugs, or there's a Puron that's available. Most of the people aren't putting their eyes on their cattle or even have the facilities to even do those kinds of things, right? Weekend warrior ranchers or hobby ranchers don't usually even have a squeeze chute, to put it into perspective, right? So look, the cattle industry is a $15 billion industry in Texas yearly. That's an annual estimated production value of our herd here in Texas. And wildlife, by the way, is $9 billion annually revenues, which is huge, right? And by the way, it can affect birds, mammals, anything that has an open wound. People can become infected by screwworms. So, we're talking about a pretty substantial amount of money at risk. And there's some basic things that we can do, right? We can inspect animals regularly, treat wounds immediately if you can. The main thing is watching for the warning signs, right? And if we do find a warning sign or even suspect a case, right? Like I have game cameras where I'm even watching the wildlife. And by the way, wild pigs, which we did not have in the 1960s, and we have millions of them in the state of Texas, and pigs love to fight, have open wounds all over them all the time. Right? Like the reason that it's important to observe your animals or your pets or your cattle, your wildlife, if you see a suspected case, is so that you can let the, Texas Animal Health Commission know so that they can drop sterile flies on you. Because if you don't report it, they won't drop the darn flies on you, right?
Do they have sterile flies available at this point?
Only 100 million. Per week. That's at the facility in Mexico. There is a facility in Edinburgh, Texas that's scheduled to be fully operational by April of 27. And then I just saw news the other day that in Tamaulipas region of Mexico, they're going to break ground on another facility as well. So I suspect there's a lot more facilities coming online. The reality is, though, it's been government officials have basically said, hey, look, there's not enough sterile flies in production to stop this. It will get worse before it gets better anyways.
Ranch Right exists for one simple reason. better numbers lead to better decisions. We work with producers on cash flow, debt management, enterprise analysis, risk management, and long-term financial strategy so the business stays resilient no matter the market. If you want to see whether that's the right fit for your operation, book a discovery call at ranchrightllc.com. All right, good. So let's keep going. What else do we need to do? We have to be a little careful, I guess, if we're in the infestation zone. We need to be a little careful moving cattle out of there, correct?
Yeah, there's rules, right? If you're in an infested zone or what they call an adjacent surveillance zone, my understanding is like the infested zone is 12.4 miles. I don't know how they came up with these numbers. Anyways,
that's how far a fly can fly in a day.
From where the fly was found, I have no idea. And then the adjacent surveillance zone is around there. If you're in the infested zone, basically the rule is that you have to get a certificate of veterinary inspection. They have to be injected or poured on with one of the approved chemicals within, and then, moved within 48 hours, basically.
Okay. And the interesting thing to me is that the treatment for screwworm, the getting your hands on the animal is really the problem, because the treatment
that's really the issue.
Not that
totally
bad,
agree.
Right?
Totally agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah. And look, I mean, we don't live in a world where everybody has a horse and a rope anymore, right? Much less, like I said, a set of cattle pens with a squeeze chute. Like, how are you going to get your hands on them,
Okay, but the basics of Ivermectin, Dectomax, those sort of things, they will treat it effectively, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And my understanding is it'll kill the larvae pretty much immediately. There's some topical sprays that you can use as well that, are available that you spray in the wound and it'll kill the maggots, stuff like that too. So,
all right. And then the old timers, they would spread like grease on navels, that sort of thing, right? Wasn't that?
Yeah, they had this. I don't actually know what it was called. Somebody's told me several times, but it was like this. Everybody described it as like a grease. It's blue, like a blue grease, but it had a chemical in it, basically, and you put it on the navel of newborn calves to prevent. It was for preventative purposes, mostly.
Yeah, just keep that open wound from being exposed and prevent flies from laying eggs on it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And the other thing is the sort of regulatory and protocols are changing constantly right now, right? I mean, you're kind of getting something new every week down there.
Yeah, lots of misinformation out there as well is a big problem. And I think the regulations are going to change rapidly on us. We just have to keep our eyes on the news, basically. And, all the local newspapers have it. You go to any feed store locally, they've all got pamphlets put out right now and all kinds of stuff. So I think as far as that goes, they're doing a fairly good job. The misinformation is probably the bigger issue, to be honest with you.
Good. So there's a place where we probably don't want to get our management advice off Facebook or.
Probably not. Not. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's talk about the rest of the country. What does this mean for cattle markets in the broader U.S.? Does this mean that the whole thing's just going to collapse and here we're all going to take a big swan dive here into the bottom of the barrel, or what's going to happen?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a speculator, but I do believe that, look, the reality is there's a lot of young cattle, stocker cattle that come from our part of the country. Texas is the largest cow-calf producer in the United States. Okay. There's a lot of stocker cattle and feeder cattle that come out of our country and go to the feed yards north of us, right? And, as this thing continues to evolve, I think it'll be really interesting to see what that does to the market, right? In theory, it will shrink the supply or at least make it more difficult, to obtain that supply. So who knows what that's going to do to the market? I remain optimistic, to be totally honest with you. I think for those of us that are capable of managing around it and have an understanding of it, I think there's great opportunity for people to still participate in these markets, and there should be no reason why our local cash market would take too much of a beating, right? But we will see. Like we say, the protocols are going to be evolving. The first auction barn to actually be in the quarantine zone happened on Friday of this last week in Hondo, which is just 18 miles from my house. So that's going to be it's a smaller barn in our area, to be fair, but that's going to be very telling of like what that situation is going to look like going into the future, because inevitably there will be more of these zones, right? So I'm optimistic.
Okay. But this thing is going to expand. Like more people are going to be affected.
Absolutely. There's just not enough sterile flies to do the job. So I would say that there's no way that it won't expand.
Okay. But what you're saying is that, probably something to be sort of thinking about if you live down in that area near where screwworms are possible. But for many of us, like here in Wyoming, I imagine we're going to be largely unaffected.
Yep.
How about trade and some of those other things? Will this impact trade?
I don't suspect it will too much. Look, I think the reality is, like, I'm not going to speculate what it will or will not do. But I think the really great thing is it's going to help us as producers, right? Considering the people that buy a lot of cattle in this part of the world and send them north, it's going to give them a really serious reason to tighten their biosecurity.
Yep.
Which they probably should do anyways, to be totally frank with you, right? We could all do a better job, especially those of us buying young cattle or moving cows. Like, I moved cows from Texas to Kansas in January, right? As an example. And before they left, this was before screwworm was even here in the United States, or we knew it was here. Everything got a shot of Dectomax. Everything got sprayed down for ticks and lice. When they got to Kansas, checked them, left them in their own area for about 14 days. You know what I mean? Like, those are the things that we probably should all do regardless of where we trade cattle or where we move them to. So I think this is a great way to encourage people to, be better caretakers and tighter on biosecurity, which comes with real threats outside of screwworm even. So
correct. Yeah. There are plenty of those, as we've seen.
There's plenty of them. Yeah.
Very good.
So, and look, I think, movement risk, to be fair, right? There is movement risk now. That's a real thing. And so that probably needs to be built into your marketing plan, such as like quarantine and movement restrictions affecting like your timing, your freight, access to sales, buyer confidence. Like, you're going to have to build that into your marketing plans. So
love it. Okay. All right. What else should we talk about before we sign off? This is good, Travis. I mean, what you're saying is no reason to panic, but probably a good reason to be on your A game.
Yeah. I'll just share a few of the things that I've started to do personally, right? I think that's a good way to kind of end it. Number one, I've had to adjust my budget.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I had to make some decisions recently where, like, I had to work a big group of calves that came off of some pairs 2 weeks ago. Well, I had to keep them closer to my main set of pens here where I live, because I sort of use my ranch as sort of an induction facility, and then I moved them to other ranches where I have custom grazers or leases. And I had to leave them here longer than I normally would, like right up close to the house, just so I could keep an eye on things. And that cost me some extra money in feed, to be totally honest with you, right? And I'm a guy that, like, I don't feed that much. So yeah, that was a new budget.
Costs in your part of the world are generally very low.
Generally very low, right? So that was a new budget item for me, right? I've had to buy like a lot of things recently, like wound spray and bottles of Dectomax, that weren't really in my budget, to be totally honest with you, right? The other thing that I'm doing personally, other than all the biosecurity stuff that we've already discussed, so I'm not going to go back over that again, but I'm documenting everything that I do. Like, I'm literally documenting every animal that gets moved, when we work them. I'm very good at like documenting, hey, this animal got this ear tag, and that's about it. But I'm documenting everything. So if I get an animal that comes up with screwworms, I can at least with confidence be able to show Texas Animal Health, like, hey, look, this is exactly what we've done right here. So that hopefully it's just one of my places quarantined and not all of them, right? Or something like that.
Excellent. Okay, very good. So, Travis, I really appreciate that. Thanks for being willing to do this on short notice. Again, this is the kind of thing we hate to see, but at the same time, probably not the end of the world. Going to be some impacts, and there are probably going to be a small number of people that are impacted heavily. And, my heart goes out to them, but at the same time, for most of us, probably not something that is going to be, the end of the world type thing. So
Right. I agree.
Appreciate it. All right. Great. Travis, thank you very much. Good luck. We might check back in with you here in a couple of months as things go along and see how things are faring. So appreciate it.
Sounds great.
Thank you for tuning into the Ranchonomics Podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.